For parents who are not familiar with what giftedness includes or entails, can you explain what types of individuals that term applies to?
Yes, I can. um, there's a whole lot of mystery around the concept of giftedness. And a lot of people are gifted and have no clue. And a lot of people are very confused about it and think, my child isn't gifted because my child is not getting straight A's. Or my child can't possibly be gifted because he or she is having trouble learning to read. And there's a lot of different definitions of giftedness out there. But my view of giftedness is that it's advanced development. And that means if a child is reading at 2.5, like your son, that's an indicator of advanced development. But there are a lot of gifted kids who don't read early. Some of them don't read until 9. And that doesn't mean they're not gifted. They are often the early builders. And you can tell that they're gifted by the way they relate to puzzles and to Legos and the creative things that they say and that they build with. And they make these incredibly advanced Lego structures, often that they've invented themselves without following any of the directions.
Yeah, that's my son.
Or they're using materials that were developed for much older children. So I see giftedness as very advanced abstract reasoning and advanced development in a verbal or a spatial domain. And all of these things, to me, fit together as one constellation. I don't see different gifts and different intelligences. I see all of these things being correlated. So I look at giftedness in a very cohesive way, and it shows itself most cohesively in young children. And I think parents definitely can identify giftedness in children as young as 11 months old. And there's research to back that up. And I have all that research in Giftedness 101. It's pretty amazing. Well, I would like to answer your other question about people who don't know that they're gifted by just reading you the very beginning paragraph of the book.
Oh, sure, absolutely.
Am I gifted if no one can see it? Some would say no. You are only gifted when you do something others deem remarkable. But the fox would disagree. And now here is my secret, a very simple secret. It is only with the heart that one can see rightly. What is essential is invisible to the eye. That's from The Little Prince. So the whole first chapter is called Invisible Gifts. And I talk about all the ways that giftedness can show itself that people would never even think of as giftedness. Here's another paragraph. There is more to some people than meets the eye. When one knows what to look for, giftedness appears in unanticipated places, expressed in unexpected ways. Plaintive graffiti, a very clever reason for not having one's homework, a really good joke, a fascinating question, a turn of phrase, such as the use of marinade in the movie Kissing Jessica Stein, painstaking absorption in an activity, a drawing of the inside of the pumpkin instead of the outside, an abiding passion, the courage to defend the underdog, stillness in the midst of chaos. Qualitative indicators of giftedness. If one notices that there is something special about a child, and conveys a glint of recognition, the sleeping dragon within may awaken and begin to breathe fire into this little person's soul.
That's excellent. I love that because it's so true, and I see that with, our 3-year-old. When we nurture him and help, if he's not nurtured, he just, kind of flounders. But when wow, you're doing great on this, and encouragement and love in the areas he's gifted in, he just really blossoms. I love that. That's amazing. All right, we have question number 2 here. It says, there's a common misconception that gifted kids don't need specialized attention and will get along just fine in life. Can you talk about why this is a dangerous assumption to make?
Yes, and I have a whole chapter on that.
I'm sure you do.
Because that's what I attempted to address in this book, is the myths and misconceptions. And it is dangerous. We have unconscious people saying to parents of the gifted, oh, all our children are gifted, which would be equivalent to saying all our children are intellectually disabled.
Exactly.
And it robs any meaning from the term, and it diminishes the parent's concerns and leaves the child without any attention or any assistance in the school. And it's not a fair and appropriate thing to do. There is no administrator, no educator who would be so dismissive of the concerns of a parent of an intellectually disabled child. And this is just the opposite end of the spectrum. And there is so much prejudice against gifted people, against the children, against the parents, against the advocates, that to be that dismissive gives parents inaccurate information and justifies neglect of real needs. Gifted children are a special needs population. The point that I have always made in everything that I've written is that when children are 2 standard deviations from the mean in either direction, they do, in fact, have legitimate needs. They learn differently from other children, and they require differentiated instruction. So a child who is 2 standard deviations below the mean is entitled to identification, to assessment by a psychologist or a licensed examiner, someone who's had training in individual IQ test. They're entitled to an individual education plan in school. They're entitled to teachers who know something about working with the gifted. They are entitled by law to parent involvement. Parents are supposed to work with the school to meet the needs of the child. Everybody knows this. We also know that early intervention makes all the difference in the world. And so we are trying to find kids who are developing differently, atypically, as early as possible. What we don't understand is that the gifted are an atypically developing population that profits from early intervention just like any other special needs group. They are a special needs population. And for them to be treated in a dismissive way, oh, they can take care of themselves, is a recipe for underachievement, for disenfranchising those kids, and even setting them up to be bullied and teased and hurt physically and emotionally in school settings. Gifted people, from the time they reach the playgroup until they're in the retirement home, are outsiders. They deal with all of the issues of a marginalized group. That's why I wrote Giftedness 101, so that people understand the psychology of giftedness. Not the education, the psychology. Gifted individuals are wired differently.
That's so true.
And they need not only different educational interventions, they need different parenting, They need
Mm-hmm.
different psychology. They need people who understands the characteristics of giftedness so that, when they have intense reactions to things, they're not put on Prozac.
Yes.
They,
Yes.
there is tremendous misinformation and misconceptions about
Mm.
this population. And what happens is hurtful. And in my book, I've documented how hurtful that is. There have been some studies about what happens to these
Yes.
kids and what happens to their parents when they are when they're victims of all this mythology. Emotional intensity is one of the characteristics of giftedness. We have data on that at our office.
I know you feel passionately about this one. Testing seems a bit controversial today. I've talked to some parents of gifted children who almost keep that giftedness a secret from their child and feel like testing them would only give them a big head and make them think that they're better than everyone else. Can you talk about how important you feel testing is and at what age it should be administered?
I feel testing is essential.
Hmm.
Um, Parents who think children will have a swelled head by finding out that they're gifted are using a set of myths from the 19th
Hmm.
century. Truly, they go back that far. In 1893, it was believed that if you told children they were gifted, they would become insane. You would transmit insanity. That is such an ancient myth that refuses to die. It's not true at all. What gifted people feel from the time they're toddlers is different from other people. And when your son or another gifted child meets other children in a playgroup for the first time and finds out that they don't think the way he does, they can't do the things he does, he doesn't get a swelled head by comparing himself to those other kids. His first reaction is, what's wrong with me? Why don't I fit in? Why am I so different? Why do I get my feelings hurt more easily? Why am I a more loyal friend than these other children? What is the matter with me that I care so much? Those are the questions that gifted young children ask in their minds. And if the parents refuse to acknowledge the child's giftedness, instead of protecting
Yeah.
them from a swelled head,
Yeah.
which is just total nonsense. I mean, really, 19th century nonsense. You're leaving this child completely without help
Hmm.
in understanding his
Hmm.
differences or her differences. You're making that child feel defective. That's what that gets
Hmm.
accomplished by protecting the child from the knowledge that they're gifted. There is no kid in the world who doesn't know the difference between the kids who read well and the kids who don't read well
Hmm.
in first grade.
Hmm.
I mean, to think we can hide this information from children is an underestimate of children's insight and
Hmm.
perceptiveness. And gifted children are the most insightful and perceptive. That comes with the territory. So what about testing? My feeling is that if you had a child who wasn't talking by 4 years old, you would feel obligated as a parent to get some testing done to find out what is going on with your child.
Yes.
If you have a child who's reading at 2.5 years old, you have an obligation
Hmm.
to find out why is your child reading 2.5 years before all the other kids
Hmm.
read, or 3.5 years before all the other kids read, and does this have some implications for how I should parent this child differently, what schools I should be looking at, what kinds of friends I should be trying to find for my child
Hmm.
so that there's a chance that he has friends
Yeah.
instead of being lonely his whole life. Is this a child who should go to school early? Is that something I should be thinking about? These are all questions that testing can answer. Testing is an absolute given when you have atypical development in the opposite direction. It should be an absolute given when you have a child who's developing more rapidly than the norm. And I have a grotesque example of why testing for the gifted is essential.
Okay.
But this is because it has occurred to 5 of my friends. If at any time in your life you sustain a head injury, in a car accident, a fall, Lyme's disease, something like that, you have to have some kind of proof of what kind of an intellectual level you had before the injury, before the insult to the brain. If you don't have that, the insurance company will give you an IQ test, will say you are of average intelligence, and that's all you should be, and you will not get one dime because no loss will be able to be documented.
That's fascinating
Proven.
because ironically enough, my husband, when he was in the military, contracted Lyme's disease, and I mean, he had typical school testing, but I believe it always came out an average score, and so we don't really have solid documentation before the Lyme's disease, and therefore we can't really get help from the military to prove that he has had, any sort of difference afterwards physically. That's a very interesting example.
So
I like that.
you know from personal experience.
Yes.
IQ testing to me is as a no-brainer as fingerprinting.
I love that.
To really understand that human being.
I love that. It's a no-brainer. Awesome.
As in terms of the age at which testing is most helpful, the best tests we have actually begin at 6 years, 0 months. And there are some good tests for children who are younger than that. They're not as good, but they do exist. And most of the time when parents have children tested at a younger age, they are attempting to get that child into some type of gifted program that requires those test scores. So if there's no program that the parent is specifically trying to apply for, my idea is the closer to 6 years, 0 months, the better. We say the ideal age for testing is between 5 and 9. We say that because children under 5 sometimes get much lower scores than they're really capable of because they're not ready to be tested. Some kids are. We've seen 2.5 and 3 and 4-year-olds who are ready for testing. But we've also seen an equal number of kids that age who weren't. A lot depends on the child's personality. And so that sometimes if the child is local, we will have the parents bring in a younger child, let's say your son. And if he's not ready to be tested, we say, nope, not going to work yet. Come back in 6 months. So we might try that with a local family. Most of our clients come from out of state and even out of country. But for a local family, we can say, no, it was a good try, but it just didn't work. We'll try again in 6 months.
That's great to know. Awesome.
But 5 is a very good age for testing because gifted children think like 6, 7-year-olds when they're 5, and so they can respond to testing like an older child would. It's just that the tests themselves are a little bit more sophisticated for children who are in the 6-year and up range. We prefer to test them before they're 9 for a couple reasons. Girls in particular become socialized into hiding their abilities, and by even 8, a typical gifted girl is going to bat her eyelashes in the test and say, I don't know. And you know she knows, and you know she isn't going to tell you. So you want to get them before they're into hiding their abilities. And for girls, it might be before they're 8. But for very bright children, and a 2.5-year-old reading is not a gifted child. That's usually a highly, exceptionally, or profoundly gifted child, because there are degrees and gradations of giftedness, just like there are gradations of intellectual disability. There's mild, moderate, severe, profound, and that occurs on both ends of the spectrum.
Gotcha.
A 2.5-year-old probably has at least a 145, 150 IQ, and it could be considerably higher. So when you're testing a child that bright, the test ceilings are too low. Even our 6-year-olds are going all the way to the top of the test. So a 9-year-old there's not enough room at the top of the test to get a good read until the child is going to get a lower IQ score.
Okay.
So for a child like yours, definitely test before 8 years old, because even at 8, he might reach the ceiling of the test.
Can you take a moment to talk about the emotionality of gifted individuals and the special challenges that this can present?
What parents notice about their gifted babies is the intensity of their reactions. They notice that way before they notice how intellectually advanced the child is. This is a very reactive, emotional being from the get-go. And that emotionality is so much a part of the gifted personality from birth to death that I have written a great deal about the intensity, sensitivity, and perfectionism that is part and parcel of the gifted experience. A great many gifted people are also introverts. And the higher the IQ, the more likely that person is to be introverted. And introverts also are easily misunderstood. So those personality factors, and introverts have very deep and profound emotions. So those personality factors need to be understood as part of the gifted experience. And that's why when people come to our center, they don't get just an IQ test. They also get a characteristics of giftedness scale, which looks at compassion, sensitivity, moral sensitivity, intensity, all these kinds of emotional indicators of giftedness. We also give an overexcitabilities inventory to the parents to fill out about their children, and that is looking at emotional overexcitability, sensual, imaginational, psychomotor, and intellectual. And we give an introversion-extroversion continuum that the mother and the father complete separately, because they usually have different perceptions of the child. And children who are 12 fill out these instruments themselves. So we are collecting a lot of information about the child's emotions, the child's social connections, the child's overexcitabilities, the child's sensitivity. All of that is part of being gifted.
Yes, I love that. And people often, when they think of giftedness, it's just, they think that it's an intellectual person who doesn't feel things strongly, but it's the complete opposite.
No, our research is quite solid on that particular issue. We've done a lot of research since 1980, and the overexcitabilities of the gifted, and emotional always comes out higher than intellectual. So we've done studies of thousands of individuals all over the world, and the grand harmonic mean of emotional overexcitability is higher than the grand harmonic mean of intellectual overexcitability. And we did a study in Denver of Mensa members who people think of as talking heads without bodies. And
Off
their
the
emotional
charts.
oversight
Yes,
abilities
yes.
surpass their
So
intellectual
true. And I'm
oversight
so thankful
abilities.
for all the research you guys are doing. I just think it's amazing how your center is really contributing to the gifted community and raising awareness. I'm just so thankful.
Thank you.
Parent feels they have a gifted child. What immediate steps do you recommend they take to better prepare their child for life as a gifted individual?
There are two websites that I think are mandatory for parents who suspect that they have a gifted child to know about. One is the Gifted Development Center. It's www.gifteddevelopment.com. And the other is hoagiesgifted.org, HOAGIES.org. These are the two main websites on giftedness with tons and tons and tons of free information for parents. So all of our articles are free downloads. There's a whole listing on Hoagies of psychologists throughout the United States who have special expertise in working with the gifted. If you're thinking of homeschooling a child, there's a fabulous section on the Hoagies Gifted website of free curriculum for homeschoolers that is just unbelievable and updated all the time. So anything you would want to know about adult giftedness, about giftedness in children, this is addressed on the Gifted Development website, and parents can just read and learn and become informed about what the characteristics are, what are the pitfalls if you just ignore the giftedness. And it gets very confusing for a child to have that giftedness ignored. That feeling of being an outsider can very quickly lead to underachievement, hiding abilities, just doing the least amount that's expected because school is not engaging, fighting with parents about homework because much of what gifted children are asked to do for homework is nonsensical. It is asking them to prove what they already learned, mastered, and have folded into a higher cognitive process. So asking them to regurgitate math facts and do pages and pages and pages of practice makes no sense to them at all. They fight it tooth and nail, and it's sort of like asking you to take an egg out of a cake batter. They've already incorporated some of these easy skills into higher level cognitive knowledge. And nothing is gained by all of this repetitious drill except turning kids off to school and to learning and to hurting the relationship of the child with the parents who becomes the enforcer of inappropriate homework. Parents need to know what homework is really helping their child to learn and what homework is turning their child off to learning. So kids who are gifted need differentiated homework assignments, and parents who are advocates or at least understanding their child are willing to go to school and say, can we give my child more relevant work, like a project in his area of interest? He wants to know about heart transplants. He wants to be a heart surgeon when he grows up. Can we give him something to do where he'll really learn something instead of ridiculous drill and repetition of what he already knows? Well, we have seen kids who had difficult behaviors. We've had seen cases where those behaviors have improved when the child was given more engaging work, when the child was identified as gifted and realized that he or she was really smart. We've seen behavior also improve with dietary changes. And there are lots of ways to deal with children who are acting out without resorting to medication.
Oh, certainly. And I think a lot of times, do you think it's because they're just so frustrated and they feel as if school is a waste of time because they already get all of this information, they already understand it
Well,
all?
I don't want to overgeneralize because a lot of gifted kids do have diagnosable and treatable ADHD. So it's not an ADHD or gifted situation. Dual diagnoses are common. So we really have to look at those things separately. I think if a child is gifted and they're not recognized and the school isn't doing anything to help the child, we're looking at creating a pattern of underachievement and possibly of acting out. And it even says in the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders that you cannot diagnose a child as gifted if the child is in an understimulating school environment. So one of the things that you have to provide before you can diagnose a child is a stimulating school environment to make sure that an understimulating school environment isn't the cause of the problem.
Well, I appreciate your time, Linda. Thank you so much for answering my questions, and I know that this is going to be really great information for